Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Peter Kletch, a product manager at Epiq. Around the corner and around the world, high-performing clients rely on Epiq experts, technologies, and resources. We streamline the complex, the costly, and the time-consuming. Epiq continuously monitors the marketplace and partners with category-leading technology providers to enhance our eDiscovery service offering. Epiq and Veritone work in partnership to enable cost-effective review and production of audio and video media as part of litigation or investigation. Joining me on today's call from Epiq, Solution Architect Ken Sokol, and from Veritone, Channel Account Executive for eDiscovery and Compliance, Corinna Soto. I'd now like to introduce moderator Daniel Wong, who handles product marketing at Veritone. Daniel, are you ready to begin?
Thank you, Peter, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. Today I have Ken Sokol with me, who flew all the way down to Seattle to our Costa Mesa studios here. Thank you for joining us.
You bet.
And Corinna, thank you for joining us too as well.
Of course.
So, today I thought before we start our webinar, I know there was some opening comments you both wanted to make, so I thought I'd, maybe this will help set the tone today for the webinar. So Ken, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, I'll start. So I know the title of this slide is about collection and audio and video. I think the important point that we want to make up front is this isn't really about audio and video. It's about a different problem. The problem is if you've got audio and video in your case, it may be very expensive if you're not very careful about how you approach the process. So the underlying theme of this presentation and this discussion is about how to manage a case where you've got large volumes of audio and video at a reasonable cost and with minimal risk. And as we go through, we'll talk about the tools, the techniques, the workflows, and the methodologies that you can use to minimize the potentially significant impact of having to deal with audio and video in your cases.
Thanks, Ken. So as we talk a little bit about audio and video, Corinna, I was wondering if you can tell me a little bit about audio and video and the different types of audio and video files and where they come from.
Yeah, of course. So I think, what's important, that the most common types of audio and video files that we're seeing today are definitely the regulated call recordings. We get those all the time, especially with the regulations that are starting to catch up with us. Some other common ones that we see are call center recordings. Those can be a little bit more lengthy in time, if you will. Usually when those hit home, those come in really large, big nuggets. And then, we get voicemail messages all the time. We'll get handfuls of 10, 20, 1,000, even 20,000 voicemails. Voicemails are usually in the 30 seconds, so you can really sweep right through them. But again, they are important because they are starting to be a part of, ending the email collections, for example. They're being tied in. I think where it gets really fun and exciting is all the different types of emerging audio and video files. And I think this is coming into play too because of the different technologies that organizations are starting to implement in-house. So just as simple as, we have conference meetings all the time to help drive ease of use and efficiency. They want to go ahead and record those internal meetings. You can start recording your go-to meetings. You have everyone in the room and review that. Where it gets really fun and exciting, I think, is that it is audio, but we are starting to dabble more into video recordings. So when you're dealing with surveillance cameras, those are in your day-to-day, whether it's at a retail store or just around the corner. Our homes are now being surveilled. We're implementing video systems. And then some other types of video are like dashboard cameras and body cameras. When you're dealing with video, there's a lot more fun and exciting things that you can do to process it and make it searchable. We're also seeing a huge uptick in social media requests. So being able to just pull things down from YouTube, for example, to help carry their cases. People are also recording conferences. So if you have a CEO talking about their company and they're a public company, they might be recorded and they're being used in cases as well. So, whether you're recording your phone conversations, but as well as just recording it by video, that's where it's going.
Well, thanks for sharing all the different types, Corinna. What I'm curious about is how prevalent are you seeing these show up in legal cases?
I think what's very interesting, as I started here and we started in the legal vertical, at first people were saying, it came in once a blue moon. It was once a year, and when it came, it was big. It a huge investigation. Now customers and partners are saying they get requests monthly, and now it's turned into, if not twice a week or more. So I think that the inquirement about it has definitely increased, and since regulations are trying to catch up, they're going to have to start reviewing it. So it's definitely growing.
Yeah, and we would concur with that. I think we're seeing two trends. One trend is we're just being asked about it more often. The other trend is when we're asked about it, we're talking about more data. So it used to be a few voicemails. Now it's a lot. And organizations, law firms are trying to figure out, how do I get through all of this?
Right, thanks. As we go to the next slide here, talking about preservation and collection, this question I'm going to ask you, Ken, is so if I'm an attorney, and I'm realizing my new case involves a lot of audio and video content, where do I start?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's important to note that the systems that are used to record audio and video are not all real tightly integrated. And we just don't have enough time in this hour to really get into all the different systems and the variations on how you might collect that data. But we can provide some important kind of oversight and what to be thinking about when you realize that your case is going to involve audio and video. So the first thing here is structured data. If you think back to the slide that Corinna was just talking about, and the different types of data. Every single one of those types of data, in the background, there's almost certainly some other system in addition to the media file itself that was collecting metadata about that media. When attorneys come to us often today, they come to us and they say, we've collected thousands of media files. What do we do with them? And the first question we ask is, did you also preserve and collect the databases associated with the system that created those media files? Oftentimes that's overlooked. So think about that structured data system. So here's the value. In the structured data system, so for example, a call management system, you can have a call management system that a telephone salesperson is using to initiate a call. It's going to say when the call started, when it ended. It's probably going to give you the caller ID, some other information about that file. We can pull that together. We can tell a bit better story about how that media file came to be and what was going on in that recording.
Now that's great. I was wondering, do you have an example or a case study that basically ties together the structured data and audio files?
Yeah, we do. It was actually one of the very first cases that we worked with you. It was an FDIC matter. It was in a short timeline, about 90 days, but they only had about 60 days to do the review. I'll foreshadow here, by the end of the process, we had processed more than, or almost 12 years of audio runtime. So it was a huge amount of data. And so a review, due diligence review for an FTC or FDIC matter, in 60 days with 12 years of audio to listen to, pretty difficult. First thing that we did was we sat down with the client and we worked through the systems that they were using to create those audio files. And these were calls from essentially like a trader broker type role. They were being recorded. They were using a call management system to initiate calls. They were also using a CRM system that happened to be Salesforce.com to collect additional metadata about the result of that call. We worked with the OEM provider of the call management software, and we also worked with Salesforce to preserve and collect the structured databases associated with those systems. We then performed some analysis to connect the metadata in those two sets of databases to the media files themselves. When a reviewer later came into the review platform, what they saw was not only the playback for the audio and ultimately a transcription of the audio, but they also saw all this metadata that we harvested from the structured data systems that told the entire story. That's important to the reviewer, but it's even more important to the people running the review, because what having that data meant was we could go in and run some objective filtering on dates and times and who was calling who and the types of things to significantly filter down the set of data that had to be reviewed. Remember, 12 years of audio. So anything that we could do to reduce this data set that had to be reviewed was a significant value to the end client.
And you know, just to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, Veritone was being able to doing the processing and help facilitate the review and get things going really smoothly. I think the underlining message here is that it can be complex, and that if you are being proactive about how you're collecting these calls and reaching out for assistance, you can definitely speed up that process.
Yeah, and again, what we see often is that attorneys really haven't dealt with audio or video at the scale that they're having to deal with it, and they just don't think about these other systems. The underlying message here is when you see a case that's going to involve a substantial amount of audio and video, ask for some help. Contact us, contact another service provider, have some people come in and advise you on these things, and make sure that you've got a clear data map and that you're capturing all of the information that you possibly can to make the audio and video process as smooth as possible.
You know, it's interesting that you say that some of these attorneys don't realize the other systems as they get involved in this stuff. Are they also surprised with anything else when they contact you about audio and video?
Well, there's certainly lots of things to be surprised about, I guess, but actually the most common thing that we run across is really not a technical issue. It's really a culture issue in the eDiscovery business. eDiscovery attorneys, lawyers are used to working in a world where everything costs on a per gigabyte basis. In audio and video, it's really about hours of audio that we worry about. So, you know, a client comes to us and says, I've got 100 gigabytes of audio files that we've collected. How much is it going to cost to transcribe that? And the initial answer is, well, we don't know, because there's not really a great scientific way to translate from gigabytes of media to hours of audio. There's so many different audio formats. There's so many different audio codecs that are used. All have different compression rates. Very, very difficult to estimate. In a pinch, we can come up with some ways to get you in the ballpark. But the best way to think about it is, first of all, the message here is know that if you've got audio and video in your case, the cost is going to be driven by the hours of audio. So think about that from day one. Structured data often can give us the answers. Those structured databases will usually have an audio duration. If we pull that data and analyze it, we can get a pretty good estimate of how much audio there is to transcribe. So that's very helpful. But it's also just about asking questions. It's about, as you engage with the corporation or organization that has this audio, asking about average runtime, if it's a voicemail message, collection of voice messages, how long is the average message? That at least can get us in the ballpark. Gigabytes, if all you have is gigabytes, we'll work as best we can to help you, but that's going to be a little bit fuzzier in terms of the overall budget.
Yeah, so just kind of bringing it back again, being able to estimate at the beginning, it all starts with the beginning, right, Ken?
Absolutely. All starts at the beginning, and just recognizing that you're getting into a different type of media and it takes some different thinking.
Great, thanks guys. So for our next slide, we want to share with the audience here just kind of a planning framework, and we thought we'd walk you through some decision tree making. So, now once, you, the attorneys, have all this data and so forth, we come to a decision tree on, how much data do I have? And if it's too much, what do I do with it, right? So what we have here is a decision tree where we say, if you got something 30 minutes, and this is kind of a rule of thumb I've been told, is that if you got about 30 minutes, go for it. Go ahead and you review it yourself. But what happens when it's too much? We got more than 30 minutes, Ken. What happens when it's too much?
Yeah, so there's a couple metrics that I think are really important to think about here. Metric number one is for a human to sit down and transcribe an audio file. It's usually about 6 times the length of the audio. So 1 hour of audio runtime means 6 hours of review time. That's expensive. Now, if it's 30 minutes, if it's a couple hours, maybe just blast through it and get it done. But when you start talking about hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours, or even more, economically, it's just not possible to take that approach. So the next step, and actually the reason why we're here with Veritone, is to take that next step of creating a transcription. So machine transcription is a very powerful tool. It can be very fast. Earlier I talked about a case study where we had 12 years of audio in a case. I'll tell you that it took us about a month to transcribe all 12 years of that audio. So this can produce results very, very quickly. Then you get to a next inflection point. And the question becomes, okay, again, it's the same thing. How much data do I have? But let's talk a little bit about what's changed. The user experience has changed here a little bit, because now if a user goes into the review platform, not only do they have a audio file or a video to listen to, or a video file to watch, they've got a transcript, they've got text. If it's a 30-minute audio recording, a reviewer can read through that transcript, maybe just skim it, and make a relevance decision much more quickly than sitting for 30 minutes and listening to the audio. So right there, you've got some acceleration in the process. And again, I still might have too much data, but the amount of data that I can tolerate for that type of review is a little bit more than what I started with. So I've got a better chance of being able to go through and read it all. And it becomes, again, an economic decision. How much is it going to cost me to review versus how much is it going to cost me to take the next step?
I think what's interesting here, Ken, is that the questions I get a lot is it readable? You know, what is the transcription accuracy? At the end of the day, the goal and the there's so many different factors that affect the transcription accuracy. To start, it could be audio quality, it could be multiple speakers in the audio, it can be the type of language, accents. I mean, there's so many little things that can affect it. We do try and focus on reaching that 60 to 80% accuracy range for someone to be able to skim it, right? It isn't going to be essentially the most perfect transcript, if you will. It's not like someone is going in, listening to it, and certifying it. They're using machines to speed up the process. Some other factors that we can do to help improve the transcription accuracies is something that we use is called training on search terms or keywords. And this is really important to the legal space because usually you have a team that is preparing a list of search terms. So if we can go ahead and improve the transcription results by something that you're already using and the methodologies that you're going to be applying to the transcription, then you're taking it to the next level. And then there's also the idea of there are multiple engines out there for transcription. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. So make sure that depending on the media source that you have, that you're applying the right transcription engine to give you the best results.
Thanks, Corinne. It's interesting how you note that no true transcription engines are all equal. So, speaking of transcription engine and quality and audio quality, Ken, I was wondering if you have any examples where audio quality and transcription, became a problem or was not a problem. Maybe if you have a story to share with us.
Well, so there's certainly stories. I think it is really important, again, attorney frame of reference here when you're coming into this. We're used to getting, extracted text from emails and things like that that's pretty close to 100% accurate every time. With audio and video, it goes a little bit back to the OCR days when it's not a perfect rendition. And we have to deal with that. We have to have a strategy that addresses the fact that it's not going to be quite a perfect rendition. I'll give you an example of one situation that we ran into. We had, again, a financial services organization. These were regulatory mandated call recordings of salespeople calling potential clients. And the salespeople were in a big war room. So I never actually saw the room, but I imagined it being like, the New York Times room or something like that with just a bunch of desks and a lot of noise. What happened in the transcription was we actually got very, very high quality transcription, very close to 80, 90%. But we also got multiple conversations. So the transcription software was sensitive enough to hear other conversations that were going on in the background. And so we got a blend. The transcript actually ended up with a blend of 2 or 3 different conversations that were going on simultaneously. They were very accurate. It still worked very well for the client, but just one of those things that you had to work through. And it was actually, from a listening standpoint, to sit and listen, it was very confusing sometimes. It actually helped a great deal to have that transcript there to be able to pick apart the pieces.
Well, interesting story. Let's go back to our planning framework slide here. Ken, thank you for sharing about, how much data will we come to the second decision point where, if I can read it all, go ahead and review it again. What happens again when we have, again, just too much data? What's next after that?
Yeah, so again, I've got better tools now because I've got that text transcription, but if I still got a lot of data, I need to do something to thin out the set. So if I've got too much data, I need to make a next step in the process. I need to use some advanced methods. So it's not very advanced, but let's start right at the top. Search terms. So search terms is pretty useful for just going in and finding keywords that are important. I think the current state of the art in eDiscovery is that we should all know that we've found that human beings are just not very good at guessing the way other human beings describe the topics that we're worried about. So search terms have limits. We can use conceptual search expansions. So in other words, I can put a search term into a concept engine, use that index for the concept engine to tell me other terms that are associated with the term I'm interested in. That can help a lot. It's still search terms, so I still might be not capturing everything. When you come back to the idea that I've got an inaccurate, or I've got an incomplete rendition, that my rendition is not going to be perfect of that audio transcription, it's interesting to look at some of the newer tools that are on the market, the predictive coding type tools that we have. So active learning methods or continuous active learning methods. The advantage of these types of methods is that they're more statistical in nature. So they're a little less concerned about having specific words. They're looking more for patterns. So if I've got a little bit of inaccuracy in my transcript, I still have a pattern that a good concept search tool or a good active learning tool is going to pick up on and show me that in my set of documents, rank it highly, for example. So using active learning tools, using continuous active learning tools, again, we're back to the situation where once I have that transcription, the media files become very much like email or Word documents or anything else that I might have, and I can use the same set of tools. And in the case of transcriptions where I know going in I'm going to have a not completely accurate rendition of the audio conversation, those tools can actually have some significant benefits. The other tool that I always like to talk about is concept clustering. So when we are through the point where we've kind of learned about our data set, we've identified audio or video files that are relevant to our case in the particular parts of the conversation, it can be very useful to use those documents to create a concept index and then run that against the entire data set. It'll cluster the data. What is interesting as a QC tool is if you see clusters where the documents that you've marked as responsive are showing with many documents that are marked as non-responsive, that's a QC flag, something to go in and take a look at. What might we have missed? So going through the process where maybe you start with some search terms, you may then use some active learning or some continuous active learning methodology, and you finish with some concept clustering to make sure that you've really captured everything. That kind of workflow or some variation on that can be very useful for going through especially large volumes of audio and video and working effectively with those transcripts.
Thanks, Ken. I was just curious, as you reviewed all these different types of, TAR tools, if you will, is there any particular one that just is more prevalent than the other, or when would you want to use one better than the other?
You know, it's a good question. So I'll say there's no silver bullet. It's really about the problem you're trying to solve. I think of the active learning tools and the continuous active learning tools. So the tools that are starting to become pretty prevalent in the market, certainly relativity and the relativity analytics tools has some capability. NextLP is another one that's out there. BrainSpace is a really common one that we hear about. Those are tools that are very effective and kind of at state of the art in terms of using active learning tools that a human reviewer can train on a very small set of documents and have the data, the algorithm go out and find more documents and prioritize them. Those are really good. Relativity concept clustering can be great for this kind of stuff. It's I'm going to say an old technology now. It's been around for a while. It's very mature. It works really well. I think of it as best in the workflow once you know what you're looking for. Once you've got some examples of what you're looking for, concept clustering and concept search can be incredibly important to make sure you haven't missed anything.
Great, thanks for sharing.
And I'm going to point out too, you know, the goal here, coming back to the beginning, I suspect the audience recognizes this, but the goal here is about using some process to save money by removing labor from the process. So these tools here are all about, again, managing risk and cost. If you don't have much data, review it. If you get the transcript and that's enough for you to get through the review, review it. But if you've got larger sets, use the same kind of strategies that we're using on other types of cases to reduce the amount of human labor involved in the document review, especially prior to production. And so it's the same strategy, just with a different file type.
Thanks, Ken. You know, I really love this slide. This is a great decision-making tree slide that anyone and everyone can use. And so, again, we'll be providing you guys all a copy of this recording 24 hours after we've aired. And so everybody will have the ability to download this presentation. Moving on to the last slide here, just, you know, I just want to make sure, you know, we kind of give some closing remarks here, and was wondering, you know, Corinna, maybe you can start off. Is there any, you know, advice you can give to our audience and maybe talk about the future of AI and where things are going with this?
Yeah, of course. I think, you know, being a part of essentially Veritone being an AI company and building an operating platform of these different transcription engines and other engines such as translation, object detection, and more, it's very interesting to see how AI is evolving. When I first started here, I believe, you know, when we were trying to find 3 or 4 different transcription engines, it was really, really tough. Now internally, our vision and our intention is every day to go ahead and track over 7,000 different AI engines with completely different capabilities. Again, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, all of these transcription engines have their strengths and weaknesses. They are being machine trained to do really, really well depending on what they're being told, as well as the types of data that they're encountering. So one of the things, and my advice, depending, since I've been around the AI and, you know, Veritone being an AI company, is make sure you do your research. You know, go ahead and make sure you're finding out the right engine that's available for your media source. We do that here internally here at Veritone. We're constantly updating our capabilities on the cognition stack that we have, and we're making them available to our clients. And in regards to just transcription as a whole, right, there's been a huge uptick. It is getting better at it. I would say, you know, how you had previous solutions that were coming in at 50 or 60%, and I'm not going to say that they're going to become 90% one day soon, but they are going to get better over time. So as you start practicing and using the technology, you're going to be able to catch up as the AI evolves as well.
That's great, Corinna. Thanks for sharing. How about you, Ken? What do you see, you know, the future here with the trends in audio and video and eDiscovery?
Yeah, I think the important message here is if you're an attorney and you haven't seen a significant amount of audio and video in your cases to date, you probably will in the future. And we're going through some significant changes in technology that we have. And so think about it. We're running this particular webcast on GoToMeeting. Just a couple years ago, GoToMeeting was a tool that, you know, an anointed few within an organization had access to. There's some people in sales and some people in marketing maybe, but not everybody else. If today you're in an organization where you have Office 365, for example, and you're using Skype. Literally every employee in the organization can now host an audio meeting, host a video meeting, and record those meetings. So it's, and organizations are learning how to use that tool set. We're certainly seeing it in our own company. I think that the underlying message there is there's going to be more of this type of data sitting on corporate networks. So here's an example. Think about a few years ago, a group of engineers sit down to brainstorm on a new product. And they're thinking through something that might ultimately be patentable. And they're in a room, they've got a big whiteboard. They have, a couple hours of conversation, they fill up the whiteboard. At the end of the meeting, somebody takes a picture of the whiteboard with their cell phone. They all go and they maybe share those pictures around on email so that they can kind of all remember what happened. That's what the state of the art was just a couple years ago. Today, with Skype meetings and with other types of tools, Teams and other types of applications, I can go into that meeting and say, hey, let's record this entire session. And instead of using the whiteboard, let's use a smart board, or let's use the virtual whiteboarding capability in Skype so that we can record the video of everything that we write on the whiteboard. And we can record that and we can share that with others across our organization. Now, 3 years down the road, I've got a patent dispute. That video, that recording becomes incredibly important. And it's not something that you're likely to have seen just a few years ago, but it's absolutely a possibility today that video might exist in an organization. So then the other thing that we're seeing a lot is the use of video and audio for training tools. Organizations are now self-creating massive quantities of audio and video. So it might be audio and video on security training. These systems that are being used are collecting information about who has watched the audio. So there's a requirement that every employee goes out and watches this video file on information security or privacy or HIPAA compliance or something like that. Someplace in the organization, there's an audit record that says who did and who didn't. Again, important information. More and more of that, it's no longer gathering people in a room for an HR person to give a presentation. It's everybody logging onto a computer and a video training system to get that information. Those might become important in a case.
I think what's really neat there is that as you guys are starting to tackle different types of media sources, right, the different engines are going to start to update themselves to make sure that they're able to process those. So kind of connecting it back to how AI and everything's evolving in parallel with the types of data that you're coming across in the future. Right.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing your time with us. We have the next section here is Q&A, and we do have a portion here to dedicate time to our listeners who have questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. But we do have a couple of questions that's popped up throughout the whole course of this webinar. So we do have one, Corinna, for you. You mentioned about transcription engines and all sorts. How does Veritone manage all those types of transcription engines?
How do we manage all the different types of transcription engines? We are essentially using our conductor technology that sits on top of the transcription engines to allow the the engines to work together. Essentially, so what conductor is doing is orchestrating all these different engines to, benefit off its strengths than over its weaknesses.
Excellent. Another question that just came in is, what if audio is not in English and in a different foreign language?
That's a really good question, and we get that a lot. So again, since we have these different transcription engines, they're all essentially have capabilities to handle foreign languages, right? So we have engines that handle Spanish, German, French, Italian, and so on. The goal would be for you to transcribe those files in that language. I think the tough part is when you have multiple languages within the same audio file, just as much as you might see multiple languages in the same document. The goal there would be, there are some engines that handle, for example, English and Spanish really, really well, and they can jump back and forth in the transcript. Conductor is taking that to the next level and being able to handle multiple languages. And so when you transcribe the file, you will see English, then Spanish, then French as it jumps through.
Great, thanks. Another question here is, what kind of issues create problems for transcript quality?
Well, I think Corinne and I probably both have good examples of this. I mentioned the one earlier where you had the war room environment where you got conversations bleeding into each other. That's a real common one. I think another common one that we see is in an otherwise perfect audio recording, the speaker's a mumbler. And we've either got a dialect or a brogue or something that is difficult for me to understand listening to it. It's going to be difficult for the machine to understand it too. So that's one of the challenges. I think another challenge that we see quite a lot, and Corinna mentioned some of the things that we're getting into in terms of prison call recordings and things like that. Different, literally codes and vernacular that's used that might not be very common, and having, to understand that. I think one of the advantages that we've seen with the technology is being able to train engines to target that kind of things, to learn as we go, and train engines to target the terms that are coming up in these things so that we can be more accurate about capturing them.
Yeah, to kind of add a little bit more, I mean, you brought up jailhouse calls and prison calls. Slang and code words are constantly changing, so that's a really big factor. And being able to evolve as those conversations, almost like a different language, is constantly evolving. The engines will too. I think another thing that really affects the transcription quality is the actual quality of the recording. Legacy systems might not be recording or retaining that audio file in a high quality standard. So as new technologies and as people start to evolve and transition from their legacy systems to newer systems, we expect that would get better as well.
Great. We have one last question here that we're going to take due to time, but in the event you did put a question in the chat box and we didn't get to it, we'll definitely get back to you in a separate email. This last question is for Ken. It looks like somebody's asking about when we were talking about the decision tree making process or the framework. We talked a little bit about the cost versus risk situation here. What's the rule of thumb for too much cost, and at what point, when you say risk, how much risk are we looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not sure that we as a service provider can give you a real solid answer to that. I think it's about the case. It's about the monetary values involved in the case. It's about the risk that the audio or video poses to the case. So is there an expectation by the attorneys that something that's said or recorded in one of these media files is going to be important to the case? Those all factor in. So I would say it's a collaborative decision. We can advise as a service provider on the costs and the cost minimization strategies. Ultimately, as an attorney, you're probably going to look at that budget and say, well, my case is about this, the potential penalties are in this range, does this make sense? I think with audio and video, the challenge that you have, unlike other types of data that were commonly experienced within eDiscovery, is there's this question of, well, if I don't do this transcript, or if I don't use these other tools, what am I going to do? Because it's, if there's, more than a little bit of audio or video in your case, it's economically impossible in all practical terms to just sit and listen to it and make that part of your case. So it's really about getting all the information together, the context of the case, and the best budgetary estimates and process estimates that we can make in terms of how we can, what it's going to cost to do the transcription, what we think we can do with advanced search and information retrieval methods to reduce the labor burden of review, and you make a decision based on that.
Great. Well, folks, we want to thank you for your time today. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Ken, for joining us from Seattle all the way here down in Costa Mesa. Corinna.
It's warmer here.
It is warmer here, absolutely.
Like, we brought you on a sunny day, too.
Once again, everybody will get a recording of this in 24 hours. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to come to our websites at
epicglobal.com.
Epicglobal.com, or you can come to Veritone, www.veritone.com. Once again, on behalf of Corinna Soto, Ken Soko, I'm Daniel Wong, and thank you very much for joining.